Evening. Well, it's been a long while since I did a Forex update. And I think I think my last one was mid-year for all the alerts. And I think I intended on doing one end of September, early October, and just never got around to it because crypto has been so crazy. So I've been much more focused on that. But yeah, now I absolutely have to because it's the end of the year and I need to update all these charts and get rid of all the crosses all over them from all my previous alerts, and also have a look at how they performed, which obviously is the normal intent of this video. I think it's been a pretty good 6 months now, actually. The alerts have actually performed pretty well. The ones that haven't, I guess, we'll see as we go through, but I think are predominantly those which have been very counter trend, or as always when the trend is like super strong and it just plows up into supply after supply or down into demand after demand, but doesn't give any retests. And it doesn't necessarily mean that my bias is the wrong direction, because it just means in some cases things just don't come back for the entries that you want for re-entries, or you have to be doing re-entries on lower time frames. Which I can't do alerts on all the low time frames for all of these. I do 8 and 12 hours sometimes, but for the most part, they're daily, weekly, monthly alerts. So they require monitoring and figuring out your own entries and your own entry criteria for the higher time frames. So I think August maybe wasn't as good. And then December's been a bit harder as well. But I think the middle section has been pretty good. Like the market's been kind of acting as you'd expect. And we can see it here. So I just start with the dollar quickly. Like I don't set alerts on this as such, because obviously we're not trading it directly, but just obviously you have to monitor it to see what's going on with the rest of the market. I was fully bullish on this from when it hit annual demand, but always being conscious that annual demand is a giant zone going down to 88, so it doesn't have to bounce off the top of it. So from the first couple of months of the second half of the year, July and August, we had that decent bounce off there. Then we came back for a retest, and this is why I think August was a bit more challenging, because August we had this chop here for ages, and I kept sort of wondering if this was gonna just do another bounce and get up to proper supply up here, or these zones that I've had marked for a while. But then it ended up sort of collapsing off a cliff, taking out the low before bouncing again. And even here, and this is also why December's been a bit harder, is because we came up and we took out that high, but we didn't get quite to where I wanted to get to at these higher levels. So this is a 3-month supply. I've lost the color off it. It's a 3-month supply. There's now an annual supply in there as well. But those are the zones that I wanted to really look for a proper, bigger market reversal. And I haven't had a great deal of time. I have updated, I think, most of the new zones on these FX charts, but I haven't had a great deal of time to actually think through what that means or what the bias is. On dollar at least, and yeah, I'm not going to go into that too much in this video anyway, because the point of this video is mainly just to get my alerts, assess my alerts and how well they've done, and then I'll think through the structures more and maybe try and do another video on what the structures are looking like. But just for the sake of the dollar, so you see we had the bounce off the annual demand in here, but now it's made an annual supply, and it was already a 6-month supply in there. So is it just going to mess around with some sideways here for a while, because we've got now significant demand below and significant supply above? We've got a big gap here from where it still hasn't filled back from 2013. It's obviously a long time ago. So we just need to see what the reaction is when it comes up into this annual zone here. So yeah, the 6 months, it was 6 months previously anyway, and you can see the wick of the last 6 months hadn't quite hit that level, which is what I was referring to a moment ago. So I have alerted up there just so we can see what happens if and when we ever get in there. There's a gap higher. Obviously, the same applies to what I said with the annual demand below. The annual supply above is very, very hot, very large as well. So it can go all the way up inside it, and it came down pretty heavily from the start of the year, really, since the inauguration. So it can obviously go back up and test these zones much higher inside, but initially I'll be looking at these two levels. Just put my mouse cursor on. Yeah, so that's pretty much it on the dollar, but that just to explain, I guess, the challenges on this. It actually performed generally, like I say, the middle September, October, November were pretty good because it did actually just nice, clean bounce, retrace, bounce, retrace, bounce, retrace, and it was only just here when it just didn't quite get up to the zone I wanted. And you'll see the same on the euro actually, and interestingly, I'll show you the euro futures chart, which is next to this one. Euro futures, so there's this 12-hour zone down here and then the retest of the monthly level. So euro futures came down into that 12-hour zone, but the euro chart itself didn't. So that's what I was waiting for. I think it was there. We'll have a look in a minute, or maybe here, but I was waiting for this zone to get hit. And then again, it just didn't quite get low enough, but the futures chart did also have the pattern earlier, which is why I have these. So I mentioned before, anybody who's seen my previous videos, I keep British pound futures, euro futures, and Aussie futures, and I have some of the other ones as well that I keep on this layout because I just want to see them align, because they are not 24 hours a day. They close for an hour in the evening, so their levels can be slightly different to the normal FX 24/5 charts. And it can be useful to look for Confluence because generally you'll get both of them hitting together. And again, not always. In the case of this euro futures over here, we just didn't get that test. In fact, there's been a contract changeover. You can see my levels are slightly off in here. That's out of the way. When the contract changeover, the only downside of charting the futures charts is when there is a contract changeover. You can see by this arrow at the bottom of the chart, when there's a contract changeover, it can shift the price and it shifts all your levels. It's a contract changeover to the next contract. So if the futures, further forward futures contracts, when the changeover happens, if the price is different, then it will it fits all the price together on this chart. You might see a gap in one way or the other. So here does look like there was a gap. I'm not sure if it's that candle. I'd have to look at a lower time frame, but you'll find some of the levels shift as well. So you then have to readjust your levels. I thought I'd done them, thought I had readjusted, but maybe I just didn't go down to a low enough time frame. So yeah, anyway, yeah, that's pretty much it on the dollar. The main thing of note is that this 6 month supply now converted into a yearly supply. We've still got major levels up there that haven't been tested, as well as obviously if you consider the whole structure and the whole down move, if it wanted to retrace to the start of that drop, then it could. On the bull side, we are coming off annual demand, challenging zone, because it's got, again, could go significantly deeper inside it if it wants. But we're just looking for reactions as and when we get to those levels. So once, you know, the most aggressive would be this 3 month level that I've got alerted there, and the yearly. So we just see what kind of a reaction we get in there. If we push higher, we look there. If we push higher off the top of the screen, and if we get a decent reaction here, perhaps it'll take out some of these zones and go deeper in the annual demand. So that's pretty much it on the dollar. And then I'll just go on quickly to the charts, because this video tends to take a while, and it might be even longer because I've had 6 months, so we've got July. Again, I think for the most part, the FX did pretty well. I think the ones that didn't, or the ones that will appear to have done less well, are when we had massive zones. So we did have quite a few things making monthly demand, monthly supply throughout the period. And then you'll have instances like, I think, Aussie yen made a monthly demand and just bounced straight off the top of it and took off. Then you'll have something like Aussie dollar itself made a monthly demand. It probably wasn't as good one as the dollar yen one or the Aussie yen one. But in the case of Aussie US dollar, it went all the way to the bottom. And that's when your buyers can start getting a bit more difficult, because it's hard to know if it's going to get the bounce off the top. So you can see here, for example, on the euro chart, we have made a very tight monthly demand in here. It's not the best one, but it's closed very slightly above that level. So what you can see is that it just taps off the top and takes off. Alternatively, it could come right back down to the bottom, not quite take out the bottom, and then take off from there. In this case, it's a weak demand, so we'd have to be a bit careful of that one anyway. I haven't set any new alerts as of having updated the new zones. So also take with a pinch of salt anything you see below or above that hasn't hit yet, because they might well change. So this is the example I was just giving on the euro, where I'd had this alert here for a long time. I was really hoping this would get a push down into this 12-hour demand at the start of the up move, but it didn't quite hit it. So I've still got that alert in there, but it's just slightly front run me, and I was hoping for that, because I was hoping for that final push on the DXY chart to get up into the 3-month supply, which would have aligned quite nicely with this. But then it decided to be awkward and reverse just slightly soon. So yeah, we can see here on euro, we hit I think it's a 3-monthly supply at the high, so I've generally been more biased short, but I like it when we get in these situations, because then we're moving into a range and you can get some quite nice trades in both directions, and that's my favorite environment to trade in. You can see when it trends strongly, I find it harder, because I would have had an entry here which didn't get hit, and if it doesn't come back for your entries, then it just takes off without you. So yeah, this would have been the first hit on the monthly supply up here. Then we had multiple hits through here. So here I was obviously short biased again, hoping for this monthly just to play out easily. Unfortunately, it's never that easy. So I still was obviously looking for long entries in here as it consolidated for longer. So we got some nice longs through there, and then back to a bit more short bias coming down here. Similarly here, still short bias because of that monthly supply, but then also I think we've had 2 weekly supply and things like that in there. So I was then looking for shorts as well, but just didn't get very much off them. But on the whole of this, I think this looks pretty good. There's a few failures in there. Short there that wouldn't have worked, a couple of shorts. The harder ones also now, it's been so long since I've checked these charts. I don't know exactly, like this, for example. I think that pink is the 5-day supply. So this one looks like it hasn't worked as such, but it's probably just gone higher in the zone to what looks like a weekly supply higher in the zone for dropping. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's a failure. Similarly here, if that was off the 12-hour supply in there, then yes, it's only had a little bounce down to 12-hour demand. But if it's in a bigger picture, we might still be waiting for things to play out in the bigger picture. So these early ones, if people short these being based off 3-month supply or off monthly supply up here, they could still get that significant move down. It's just taking its time doing it. And that's why I say you've got to figure out what strategy you want to trade. Like for me, I just trade scalps. So I'm looking for, okay, it's just hit a major zone, but I'm not, like, if it hits a monthly supply or a monthly demand, I'm not necessarily holding, thinking, okay, it's hit a monthly supply, now it's going to 0. I'm just taking the initial scalp off it, noting that for my bias. So then if we do start getting structure and rejection, then you can see I'm looking for shorts, retest shorts, all coming through here until it gets down to somewhere significant that I might want to look for a long. In this case, didn't hit it. So on the whole, euro pretty good. Moving on to the pound. So this is my pound euro layout. Keeping an eye on what Bitcoin's doing out of the corner of my eye. Pound also was, I think, sort of similarly challenging, and you can see over here. So we had there's a big 3-month supply. It hit up here. I haven't got those crosses in there because that hit earlier in the year. Then obviously, I think that's why I said August was a little more challenging, because it came up all the way, retrace this entire drop all the way up to the top again before getting another decent move down. So there were a couple of early shorts in here that didn't work terribly well, and it was just a bit messy. Some of the longs weren't too bad. And some of them I can probably say that one I probably shouldn't have done. Once it had gone up to the start of the impulse coming off month or 3-monthly supply, I probably shouldn't have been putting an aggressive long in. But it's difficult. You can see in some cases, like for example here, you had a rejection down, and it gives you, this is enough of a bounce, while it may not look. So in this case, it didn't bounce. If it had bounced up to here, which you can see I had alerted anyway, then that could have firstly given you a great short down, but also is enough on a lower time frame to look for that long entry and just take a long scalp up to there, similar to what we had over here. So I don't necessarily think, while it's wrong in the grand scheme, and this one didn't work, you would have been stopped out unless you've waited for a proper low time frame setup, which you may or may not have got there. And even if I go down to the lower time frame, it's possible. Actually, in this case really didn't give any bounce at all, because by then it was ready to reverse. But so that's what I'm looking for when these zones hit those scalps. So even here, we had a sort of 3-week supply. It looks like it had put in there. So I looked for another short entry. It did give a little scalp, but then went higher in the zone. Another scalp, then went higher in the zone before the bigger move down. And it's quite hard to judge those. At least I can't. I'm not capable of judging those unless I see them. So I can't. So I alert things, and then we're just always looking at what the low time frame structure is. If you're hitting a weekly, a monthly, or something like that, you're looking for something fairly significant, like a daily change in structure or something like that before you want to get in. If it's hitting a daily, then maybe you can look for an 8 or 12-hour structure. That's why I tend to stick with the higher timeframes on these charts. So if we do hit a major zone like this, then I am looking. We can see here, for example, today. This has just hit, I know we've hit a 3-month supply, the 3-month level here again. I know we're up in the 3-weekly again. We've taken at the stops above here, although we haven't quite made it to my zone up there. However, it made a daily supply. So that one I'm more than potentially more confident. Been very choppy through here, but that's when I put in the more aggressive short retest entry or long retest entry if it gets given. So here, for example, like my bias was still down, so there was no long retest entry when we came into here. It was still looking for shorts because I wanted this to come down to 2-month demand. Now, even that strategy doesn't always work. And again, as we just saw with the euro, it doesn't always, like sometimes I know I can get too set on going, right, this is where I want to long, therefore price coming here has to come down here. And it doesn't have to, and it doesn't always, perhaps we would have got the bounce up from there, gone, taken out the highs and then come down. So you don't know what's going to happen, and you're just looking at the reaction as each zone as they hit. So anyway, yeah, like not too bad on the pound through September, October, November. Not so great in August. And then, like with hindsight, I can say here, this one on the 25th of November was probably a little bit stupid. I knew we'd hit this 2-month demand. I think I was looking for a swing fail, ideally, of those two, which is why the cross is black, but also saying, okay, it's coming to 2-month demand. But again, like I can say now, it's very easy to say with hindsight, oh, well, I shouldn't have done that because clearly, we were on demand. So, and I do, that probably is the case. However, it's possible, and what I would suspect I was thinking there is that maybe we were going to get another wave down into here before moving up. And you never know, you might get that. So, but it's trying to remember what your bias is. And the other reason I need to get all the crosses off these charts so I can actually figure out what my bias is. This also note as well on the pound, we have this massive monthly supply that was made here. So it had that reaction off there, and therefore was worth looking for a lower high there in case we got the further move down with this monthly playing out off the immediate test. But in this case, obviously it's gone higher inside the zone. But all up, not too bad, but not great in August until September, then started getting better and some good entries on there in September. Euro pound. Again, I need to remember the larger structure of this because I feel like sometimes I delete the zones because having giant brown things all over my chart makes it a little bit difficult. So I think I was short biased on this being in 6-month supply, although it was the second test of it. And now has obviously gone higher and is closed above. So potentially we've got a 6-month demand on this now. Again, not the cleanest, but it's now there. But I think that's why, just trying to remember why I was so short biased. I think maybe there was a monthly supply in here as well, but obviously I was quite short biased on this, but then also some quite good longs in here as well. And I do like trading euro pound. For me, it's one of the things I learned on. It was probably the hardest pair to learn on, so I don't know if I'd recommend it, but I actually find it really fun to trade. It loves swing failures, so if you like trading swing failures, then this is one of the best pairs for that. And also then the reason I have that on the same chart, for anyone who hasn't followed me before, I have show you I have euro US dollar, euro pound, and pound US dollar on the same chart because you have a triangulation between the three pairs. So if the dollar is driving a move, then you might find that pound dollar and euro dollar hit support or in reverse resistance at the same time. And then what you'll tend to find is euro pound will either go sideways or it should be hitting resistance. It tends to do the opposite of what pound US does. But yeah, if one hits support, you want the other to hit resistance. I want euro, dollar and pound dollar to hit support at the same time if the dollar is going to drive the price. I want euro, dollar and euro pound to hit support or resistance at the same time if the euro is going to drive the price. So it just helps you make those judgments. But yeah, I mean, as a general rule of thumb, you can generally say that pound US will do the opposite to euro pound. Generally, and I think that's because the dollar is driving so much of what the market does. So assuming you're not, maybe that's more also a New York session. But you can assess those things for yourself anyway. I just like having them all the same, because when I am really dialed into this and really on top of what's going on all the time frames, on all the charts, then I'm very conscious of everything hitting supply at the same time, everything hitting demand at the same time, and then we'll be looking for a wholesale market reversal, and the probabilities will become significantly higher. So euro pound, what do we have here? So we have some early shorts over here, pretty good back at the start of, when's that, August. Couple in there that failed, longs, a couple of longs. So basically there's a couple of longs in there that failed or that weren't great, like here and here. And there's a couple of shorts that weren't necessarily that great. That one probably would have gone through that zone. And then some really solid top calls and bottom calls throughout here as well, but gave some really nice scalps on this. Then up into the next 3-week supply up here, obviously you have the first hit and like alert there, and then it takes some time messing around before it finally goes into a bit more of a downtrend. So again, some of the longs, but even this long, again, decent scalp from an 8-hour chart. You still have 2 candles, 16 hours of up there before it then came back down deeper. So on the whole, I'm pretty pleased with what those alerts on euro pound. Again, now I just need to figure out my bias going forward on this, particularly if it's made that new 6-month demand in there. Yeah. Okay, then on to pound Aussie, the last one on this layout. Yeah, I just have this here because it's pound, and then Aussie is on my next layout. The pound Aussie, I find it's a little bit harder to judge against the Australian dollar, but again, it's still similar to what I just described for euro pound. If you'll find if what you're looking at is if pound US and Aussie US are both hitting demand at the same time as support level, then you're going, where is supply? And this is if you want to trade pound Aussie, you're going, which one is likely to be stronger off that bounce? And then you look to either long this, if you think pound is going to be stronger off a bounce and both of those on support, then you might want to long pound Aussie and you might get a bigger move. Else, if you think Aussie dollar is stronger or stronger overall, like it has been at the moment, then you might want to be shorting this. And you can see this is basically showing you that Aussie has been stronger than pound for a while, for most of the year. So it can basically also tell you, if you're thinking through the logic, it can tell you that if you're going to take longs, you probably want to be taking longs on the Australian dollar rather than on pound. Or just trade this chart, that's up to you. So similar here. Again, I was obviously quite biased for shorts on this. I think we'd hit a major, so we've hit a monthly supply at the high. It had this vastly overextended move at the earlier this year, and the pound was really strong, and then the pound started weakening off. So I was generally short biased for the most of it. This one obviously only gave a small move off there, but maybe was a part of a larger zone. And by the looks of it, I think it was part of a weekly or 2-weekly zone there. Then some nice shorts through here. One, not sure what I was doing with that long entry there. And again, this might just be one of those scenarios that there was some lower time frame here, and because we've had a bounce there, that maybe I feel like we might go higher inside that zone, or possibly if this had made that monthly by that point in time, which actually I think maybe it hadn't. I might have been just thinking, okay, we're going to get one more push into a supply, which we then didn't get. So a little bit harder on the long side on this earlier on. Still decent move there, not a great one there, not a good one there. And then now obviously we're back in monthly demand down here. I can see I've got a yearly level there as well, so I need to check out what that is and whether that's confirmed demand or supply. But now obviously my bias has gone back to the long side because we've now hit a 2-month or a monthly demand at the base. And as I say, it doesn't mean you can't trade both directions. I've still had some short entries. We've still got a 3-weekly supply here. So while it's still thinking about turning around, it can still go lower in the zone. So I'm conscious that we're in a monthly demand and looking for long entries. And this is where, yeah, I think December has been a little bit more awkward because we did have this 5-day demand here. And it's gone quite a lot deeper inside. So it's taken out my more aggressive long entries here. Then it's made a weekly supply, and again, back to the short. So a little bit mixed there, and just highlights a bit of what's been more challenging about December, just sort of messing around and not really holding zones, and really it's in a range, to be fair. So it come up into supply. I can see now with hindsight this is a little bit choppy, so maybe there's zones that I shouldn't really have alerted. Okay, so that's that. So all up, yeah, not too bad. And yeah, you can see from those charts that August was the challenge. Moving on to the Aussie layout. So we've got Aussie US, Aussie CAD, and Euro Aussie on this layout. So Aussie, as I was saying a minute ago, did create this massive monthly demand here. So I was looking for more aggressive. I think that was the first one. October the 1st, by the looks of it, it probably closed above in September and then made this monthly demand. But in this case, while I was looking for a long there and it gave a little bounce, looking for a long there, again, a little bounce there, it came all the way back to the bottom and then has just held the bottom of it. For a really nice long entry there for finally getting the move up, holding this monthly demand. But that's, yeah, the challenge when you have these huge zones, that if you're looking at something this size, that's the whole monthly zone. It doesn't have to, if it confirms it at this point in time, it doesn't have to bounce off the top here and just go straight up. In some cases it will. That's where you're looking at what is the reaction there. In this case, I had a decent reaction, but then also had a 12-hour daily supply right above, so it just came straight back down deeper. So at the highs, I was bearish bias up here, and then still a little bit bearish. And I was probably a bit lucky with these because of the monthly demand. I feel like maybe I forgot my bias a little bit here, but actually, in fact, we did get the move lower and came all the way back down to the bottom anyway. Oh yeah, so I think, well, maybe I didn't forget my bias. In fact, we are in a 6-month supply up here, I can see. So again, to be short biased, but knowing that you're coming into a monthly demand, you're just considering both of those situations, which obviously again makes it a little bit more challenging on the higher time frame. And I think if it gets like that, you don't have to be like, oh, look for those aggressive scalps off the level, but you can just look at waves, because there are 2 ways I'm looking at all these charts. One is obviously by supply and demand, which I find by far and away the most reliable way to look at any chart. But also you are looking at what's the wave. So you've had a wave, if you have a wave up, if you don't, well, once you've had that wave up, then you can look to long the start of the wave. Anything in the middle is likely to give you scalps. Maybe it'll make a higher high like it did in this case. But if you wait till it gets back to the start of the impulse, then you're much more likely to get the next move up. It's just the problem is if it comes back there, it doesn't have to come back there. And the same in this case, we had a nice bounce there. In fact, I had bounces here, which I didn't have entries for, I think, because I had that 4-hour from a while back. But yeah, so you're looking at scalping these, but it's when it comes down to the start of that impulse, that's when you actually get the next big move up. So while it has made monthly demand up here, or had that bounce off it there, obviously it didn't get very far and it wanted to come back to the start of the impulse first. And we can maybe contrast that when we get to the Aussie Yen chart to see how that responded. I feel like the monthly may have been detailed. It also depends a lot on the structure. I think the monthly on that one may have been a cleaner one. This one isn't overly clean. Oops. So it's now got another monthly, but you can see here this close above on the monthly chart. Yeah, in September, like it's a 2 candle. So while it's a level there, it's not a nice clean monthly demand because it's a 2 candle close up. In contrast, for example, over here, you've got a monthly demand that's at the base and it's got a 1 candle close up. Same here, monthly demand, and it's taken out the low in this case, and it's got a single candle close above. It hasn't got the double 2 green candles before it comes and tests. So it's better if you can have the immediate month that creates the demand, B, a strong close. So we'll go back to those alerts. So yeah, again, August not so great. A couple of longs in here that weren't so great as it came back down to the side of the impulse. So it's Aussie's been a little bit more challenging. I normally used to like trading Aussie a lot as well, but again, a bit more challenging because a bit more chop. When it does run, it's nice. But then when it does run, obviously here it didn't come back to test anything, and the same here, it hasn't come back to test anything. So this whole time here, I was bullish again on the Aussie. And also once it had started breaking, I think it was a weekly supply in there. So once it had broken through that, however, it doesn't come back to test for me. It doesn't come back to test. I think it got very close. I had this one was annoying. I think I've moved the alert up a bit now, but I think in here, I was looking for it to test that weekly demand, and I had that set as an aggressive alert at the time, but unfortunately it just didn't quite get to it. I don't think the alert went off either. Now, obviously, looking like we're getting a bit of a retracement. We are on 6-month supply, but I'll need to consider what the high time frame's done. Looks like we made a 2-month demand in there now. I'm not sure if that's new this month, but we'll see. But all up, not too bad, maybe about 60-40, not as good as I'd like with some of these failed ones. A couple of longs in there and a couple of shorts in there. Maybe a bit better than 60-40. But yeah, not too bad. Then moving on to AUDCAD, which generally looks relatively similar to Aussie US. So this you can see a lot more red crosses on this. I've been a lot more bear bias on this because particularly up here when we came into annual supply, I think when I look back at this, I actually feel like this is already a test of annual supply. So maybe I didn't notice that and was just being overly aggressive. It now looks like it's created at least a 6-monthly demand in there and possibly a yearly demand, or unless that's an old yearly demand, but possibly a 6-month demand in there. So I might have to revise my bias on this a bit. But all up, actually, it's not been too bad. Like while it hasn't gone very far, the consolidation's been a nice tradable one. And even back down here, we sort of had some short bias, and it did take out the high. Then we had another long, so we got longs for the breakout, and some couple of shorts in there and some short scalps through there. And then go down to the 8 hours. It's always a bit easier to see what the entries are. Again, the long side's been more challenging. So that long obviously either broke the zone if I had it on the 8-hour zone in there, or went deeper inside if there was a giant zone that I was looking at. Similar here, there probably would have been a daily or something there, and it's just pounded straight through it. So the shorts were definitely more viable or higher probability up here and worked a lot better. So there's one there that didn't work so well because it wanted to go higher, or still take out the high. And then finally over here, I think we had looking for a stop hunt of these two levels and then a stop hunt of the high, so the black crosses, to then get a decent move all the way down into here. And unfortunately, I think didn't get the test that I wanted. This alert would have been from back over here. Didn't get that final test. Now in 2-day supply, so we've got some messing around off here to get that short, but still considering what to do with that 2-day supply in there. But again, all up, not too bad on this. Couple of failures in there, but also some really nice, decent moves off the alerted zones. And then finally on this layout, EURO-AUD. And this one I found a bit hard as well when I compare it to the Aussie US, because as I said, normally Euro-Aussie will do the opposite to Aussie US. But this is when I say do the opposite, I actually also typically mean the slower time frames, because it's just reacting to intraday news and data and those sorts of things. But the difficulty arises when you get something like this, where this is a monthly demand. So you've got Euro-Aussie with a monthly demand. And then, as I said just a moment ago, you've got Aussie-US with a monthly demand as well. Then I become a bit like, okay, well, so one of them's likely to break. And it cannot, like I say, that in them operating the inverse to each other tends to be on the lower time frame. So it can still, so you can see here, we've still got bounces from September. So it was October that Aussie US made the demand. So this is when we got the bounce off the top of here, whereas Aussie US then went deeper inside the monthly. That's what the other thing, just to be a bit conscious of when the zones differ. So again, I've been more short biased on this. We had this big sort of blow off here, like retracing a lot of the COVID pump and dump that we had. So it's not surprising that we're getting some consolidation through here. It's now made a monthly supply. I think that's new. I think that wasn't there. Just check. Wasn't there. Oh no, that was there previously. Okay, so we've made a new monthly supply lower, but we did make a monthly supply. Actually, yeah, this is one of the structures that I tend to find incredibly irritating. And it would be here. So at this point in time, we made this upper monthly supply, this larger brown box, which I still have drawn in, but you can see that we've come up and then we've gone and swing failed the top. And the cross pairs are kind of more inclined to do that. That's what I'm talking about. So it closed this red candle in September below, dropped a bit lower. Admittedly, it's in monthly demand still, but then went up, swing failed the high of the monthly supply before then dropping. And again, that's just one of the structures that I can't predict. Like sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. I feel like it's more common on the cross pairs, so it's something I'm going to keep an eye out for this year. So you can see, for example, now it's made a monthly supply. Maybe it'll wick through up to here before then dropping again. Maybe it's just because it was in monthly demand. So, you know, that it's still fighting between supply and demand. So yes, it kind of made a monthly supply, but it's what I would refer to as a weak monthly supply. If in the same moment, arguably also this is weak monthly demand. So what we're looking for is if you make a monthly demand like this, you really want, so with the green candle that closed here afterwards, what you really want for this to be strong is for that green candle to close above taking out the previous high. So you want a large green candle. Excuse me, it's not easy drawing with the magnet on. You want a large green candle, but in this case, it's only it's a decent green candle, but it's a small one and it didn't take out the high. So therefore, when it comes back to test this, drawing off again, this monthly zone, it's obviously struggled a bit and it's going a bit deeper inside. And similarly on the supply side, again, you want a decent candle that takes out the low of the previous candle. Obviously, this didn't close that far below that candle, didn't break demand, did make a lower low when you're looking at the local structure, however, didn't break demand. So again, it's got weakness or its potential weakness because it's not proven its ability to take out the buyers yet. And similarly, this demand zone hasn't proven the ability to take out the sellers up here yet. So when it's come back up into this daily zone over here to retest, it's rejecting that. So yeah, that was the challenge in September on this, and that's hence I was looking for a lower high there and some shorts all through here, but it just sort of blasted through. I think this was the China tariff news as well. So again, you know, these were failures, but I think it happened in a very, very short space of time. So hopefully nobody would have been taking shorts in this time anyway. Because for me, as soon as I saw that, I'm just like, oh, no, I'm not touching it. Nice swing fail of those two highs there, though. So that would have given a very nice short. But yeah, a bit of a mix on this as well. Again, August, early September, not so great. You know, a couple of longs. Again, just a decent move down with no retest. Short in there, nice, but for the most part, very little, or just minor scalps off these long entries through here till it came down, decent move off there, and then that short bias coming in based on the monthly supply that we had from there. But yeah, again, not too bad. Probably again about 60-40, 70-30. I can see there's some scalps through here, which would have worked really nicely on the long side, and then, you know, short through there, but then down into a long entry, etc., etc. So again, all up, not horrendous there. So yeah, if you're following my alerts, like this is what you're doing, and you're just assessing. You've got to assess the structure each time. Like sometimes there's more strategy in the alerts that I set, and other times I'm literally going at the weekends. Okay, we've got a weekly. Where's the weekly chart? Where's the weekly close? Oh, there's a new supply. Alert it. I'm not necessarily thinking through in massive detail each time. Well, it's come from here. It's doing this. This is weak. This is strong. So you'd be there a very long time if you had to do that. So as and when the alerts go, I then think about what's the rest of the market doing. So anyway, that's the Aussie. Moving on to New Zealand. So we've got the two New Zealand pairs, and then randomly I just have dollar Swiss franc, but I don't chart any of the other Swiss franc pairs. Just have a little bit of water. and I might have a cigarette as well. So New Zealand, obviously, so back in the day, New Zealand used to be very similar to the Aussie dollar, but that seems to have just disappeared dramatically. I think maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago when I was trading, they both would always do the same thing. But for now, I'm not sure why. Maybe it's the influence of China and on the Aussie. Probably has less influence on New Zealand. Maybe also the influence of minerals and mining, because obviously there's a lot more of that in Australia than in New Zealand. But yeah, they've kind of, so we haven't got anywhere near the strength on the New Zealand that we've seen on the Aussie, which I guess is reflected in the Aussie New Zealand chart, but I don't look at that. So again, here on the New Zealand, short buyers, we come up into 3-month supply up here at the top. So it's generally short bias on this and wanting it to come down at least into this monthly zone down here, and also very possibly even still to take out a lot of these lows and come down into that 2-week demand all the way down the bottom there. So this is a difficult one because it's making a kind of descending triangle. There's a bit of a gap down there, and then there's a gap into this demand which is untested. So it would be really nice to get from the higher time frame perspective, then you then drop down into this zone and then get a decent move, taking out all these stops above. Cross that bridge when we come to it. It did, however, as I say, make a monthly demand. So we did take out some stops here on this candle back in April and pump back up. So that was a reasonable place to start to look for longs. My drawing is back on again. So yeah, it was generally short biased. Then we did have a few zones. There was, again, difficulty when you have a move like this, because I think there was 3-week demand, 2-week demand, various things in here that are worth looking for longs on. And I think they gave some all right longs, judging by looking at this. We had some all right longs off there, but it was just choppy through October on that before we came back down. For here, I was just being, I think actually that did, if I remember right, that did actually give a bit of a scalp off there, but just up into 8-hour supply before coming back down. And now it's been slightly more challenging in December again, as I said previously, on the short side, because we had 2-week supply, I think 3-week supply. But again, once you've hit that monthly demand, are they just going to run up through everything? In this case, yeah, we've got some very small reactions off daily supply. And I think that was, yeah, like I said, 2-week or weekly supply level in there. Small reactions, but still just picking up local demand and grinding up. Decent move there, and then a decent move off this last one. So we think a couple more aggressive shorts here, and then some better ones a little bit higher. Yeah, I kind of remember, without going into looking at all the different timeframes, I kind of remember this has been difficult because it's got, I think even where it's hit now, so I had a 12-hour supply, then we've got a daily supply, then there's a pinkest 4 or 5 day, then you've got this 3-week just above you. Now, by the looks of it, got a yearly, or that's a historic yearly level. Then you've got 2 months. So again, it's which of these many levels on the high time frames is going to reject from. In this case, it rejected straight off the 3 days and 12-hour supply immediately. But now is in weekly demand, hence the long entry. So is it going to get another move up and fill some of these gaps up higher, or just up into this monthly level there? Because it can just as easily do either, I think. People will say, oh, this is an imbalance, it has to fill it. I don't have that view. I've seen many imbalances not fill. And I also think if you draw fair value gaps, as they're so-called, all over your chart, as well as supply and demand, basically your entire chart is made, enough of my chart is boxes as it is, without having your entire chart be boxes. So if I say, oh, because people will look to trade in this zone, as I'm calling it a fair value gap, and I'm like, I very rarely see them work, for a start. The times they'll work is if you've got, for example, if you have a supply right underneath that, and you might get a wick that takes out supply. So, but to me, that's just a stop hunt of my supply. It's not filling a fair value gap. If it's going to fill the fair value gap, what that's saying to me is that there's no supply in here. So if it is going to come up higher and not swing fail my supply below, then it's just going to fill it and then come back down. So I don't think it's useful to have fair value gaps, but I'm sure there'll be people who could watch this who would fundamentally disagree with me. But whatever works for you, trade what you want to trade. But I think fair value gaps are a bunch of, I'm not going to say that word. Not sure why, since I swear all the time anyway. Anyway, so New Zealand dollar again, not too bad. Probably 60-40 again, a couple of failed shorts. Dubious on the long side, actually probably a bit more 50-50 on this, depending on how you trade. Obviously didn't get very good reactions off these, but certainly got reactions on the 8-hour chart, enough to scalp or to move your stops to break even, but also to be aware that we're in we've got some significant demand below and choppiness, and that therefore it might find it hard to get back through. So that's the other thing you should be watching for. If a zone hits. The other thing I do is if a zone hits, I immediately reset the alert for the next zone up, particularly if it's not something I'm not a day I'm trading myself. I'll just move it up. I'll be like, okay, the next zone above is there, set the alert. But it doesn't necessarily mean I'm looking at what's going on here or watching the whole time. At that point, I might be hoping at least we're going to move down into this zone. I would have had the alert down there on this 8-hour demand for the next move up. If it doesn't get hit, then potentially we'll just grind through the supply, which is what's happened in this case. Okay, so that is New Zealand, Euro New Zealand. Yeah, another one that was a bit harder from the high time frame perspective. So obviously in this massive monthly supply, I was going off the top of the screen, huge monthly supply there. So we've had the first couple of hits, nice reaction off here, nice retest entry there, but then obviously it's moved higher inside, and there were presumably some levels that it could have swing failed. I've got these black crosses, but it just ground higher. I think this was a 4-hour at the top there, so that one wouldn't have worked, and it just moved higher and higher inside the zone, but then didn't quite get to, well, scroll all the way to the left, but daily supply and 5-day supply up here didn't quite get to there at the high. So that one's been a bit more challenging on this one. Some nice shorts in Wednesday, October, and then nice short there and a couple of longs through here have been nice. But yeah, the trending on this, you can see, has just been a little bit harder. Some of the, so while we've had reactions at these zones as you'd expect, they haven't given very much. There's no decent pullback for them getting the longs. So this is an example of something where it just hasn't really come back for the long entries. And even here, I think I was looking for it. You can see I've got a tiny little trend line drawn there. I was looking for that to take out the lows and come into this weekly demand, but again, slightly front ran me. Not sure why I didn't have an entry there, possibly because it was still coming off monthly supply at the high, so I wouldn't have wanted really to look for longs here, I don't think. Wrongly in this case. So yeah, and then not so good long. Actually, well, again, decent scalp long there, decent scalp long here, but neither of those getting back up to supply. So this one I can see was a little bit more challenging from not really wanting to come back to test zones that I wanted it to, and also just being choppy enough to not give much reaction in some cases, and probably just similar to New Zealand. So I guess New Zealand's probably been a bit harder in this half of the year. And then finally, dollar Swiss franc here. So this one you can see again, I'm quite long biased. This generally performs much more closely to what the dollar's doing. So I think while I wasn't necessarily long biased, if we go to the higher time frames over here, I think on the Forex.com chart, we've got these giant wicks from back in 2015, 2012. I think all the other FX charts that are varying, like they don't necessarily have such big wicks here. We do have this weekly, if we ignored the wick, this weekly demand wick, which got wicked through. But generally, I didn't really want to be so long biased on this, but was long biased mainly because of what the dollar was doing and the dollar having hit annual demand. And I think similar with the dollar CAD, dollar yen, it was using the dollar chart to kind of go, okay, these are probably going to get more bullish because the dollar's hit annual demand. Now, for August, September, that worked pretty well. So back over here, a couple of shorts and then some nice longs, not too aggressive on that one. Some nice longs through here, more nice longs. Then from, I guess, November is when it started getting hard. So you can see I've got this big 3-week supply in here. Show you that there's everything on it, but you can see this is where it got a bit more difficult. So we had a 3-week supply there, came up, tested it, short back down again, that's fine. Then it made another 3-week supply in this October can, closing this candle below. Not a very good one, but then went straight back up and again almost to the top, but then rejected again, but then flipped that, so then didn't bounce. So I think at this point I was then kind of like, okay, we've had a 3-week supply, it was a weak supply, got flipped to demand, so let's look for longs in here, and then it went straight back through those. So I think that was then when the dollar came down a bit earlier than I expected. So this section here, I think, is where I had some longs that then failed, and that's part of the reason. Yeah, these ones. Although again, did give some scalps, but then it flipped again that 3-week back to supply again. So it's become a little bit more challenging. Then it was, then there was the question, is the dollar going to go lower? And, really this isn't in a decent, I tend to only look this aggressively if this whole thing is sitting on a monthly demand or something. So you'll see on the previous charts I've looked at that I'm saying I'm, aggressively shorting on New Zealand US or pound US or euro US because I know they're all in monthly supply. So my bias is more to the short side, even though I think we're going to get some sideways for a while. Here, my bias was more to the long side because of the dollar, but that's just because of the dollar. Like if we were in some giant monthly demand here, then that would be better, but we haven't been. So that was caused some of these problems with the longs here. So on top of the 3-week I just showed you, I think also it made a 2-week demand in here. But then, I think it just went straight through that, coming all the way back down. But again, I was a bit too long biased here, given that it started to just mess around. Maybe that was just unlucky. Short side, obviously, has given some swing failure shorts. That one looks a little bit early, so I'm not sure what I was looking for there. Maybe a swing failure into this day's supply up here, but it came and took out more of the stops there. Similar here, it just looking for taking out stops above these highs, but again, went a bit higher. And then just generally less on the short side, a couple through here, and then a couple of if we're going to get stop hunts because they're nicer to look at, more reliable. And then this one, as I said, because we had the 3-week supply, I'm like, okay, well, now we've got a 3-week supply, maybe we should short it back down, but then it went all the way to the top. So all up, not too bad for August to November, and then just December became a little bit harder over here. Right, so that's the New Zealand pairs, and we've got the yen pairs. So the yen, obviously, as you know, we had the big carry trade unwind, although somebody then said to me apparently it ended up not being an unwind, but I'm not sure. I haven't looked into that. We had this big unwind at the start of the year, which had this huge drop. Is that it, or is that? Yes, that is the big drop. But all of these, so while we had this big unwind, all of these, like this hit 6-month demand down here, all of the, I think Euro yen, I think Aussie yen maybe is the only one that actually just wicked through the 6-month demand, I believe, but I think all the others hit 3-month, 6-month demand. So there's no reason to actually still be bearish on them. Yes, it's had this big drop down. I think I'm actually looking at the right time. Yes, I know. So I had this huge drop and then retest, but then still holding 6-month demand the whole time. And now obviously we've had a couple of hits, didn't take out the low there, and it's come up a bit more, I say more weakly, but just more calmly. But I'm not sure if people are just jumping back on board with the carry trade again, and whether that's then when they're going to, if the Bank of Japan suddenly decide to increase their interest rates, whether this is going to cause another massive problem down the track. I was generally less on the dollar yen than I am normally because it was just being a little bit painful in August, September. I think I'm back to the 8 hour, so wasn't too bad. Did have some all right shorts in here and then a couple that didn't work so well. But here was just really messy, and I think I was really hoping that it would just drop out the bottom of the range to get down to these zones to look for a proper long. I believe this was the sort of messy time it created. I think it created 2-week demand in there. 2-week, maybe a weekly. Through. So it created not the best 3-week, but it created a 3-week demand in here. So again, wanted to be long on that, but it came quite deep into the 3-week before then taking off from there. Did give a nice retest, gave a short, and then gave a nice retest. Not sure what that short was. Maybe it didn't. Maybe that went through whatever zone I had over here. Probably like a big daily or a 2 daily or something, so maybe just went higher in the zone. But again, it's given some nice long re-entries through here, and then some nice shorts as well. And now I'm just trying to figure out what this is going to do. Again, I was hoping that this low here was going to take out that low into there. So it's the concern on this, I guess, is that it's probably leaving maybe a few too many stops below. So if it does want to collapse, it's got lots of stop hunting can be done. So we'll see. So yeah, I laid off that a little bit in the second half of the second half of the year, because it became slightly less clear what it was doing. And very similar on, so euro yen, I think, and possibly even pound yen. Euro yen is going to look like I was very short biased, which I wasn't, but just started and not coming back. So I was short biased through here. I believe we were in a monthly supply. And again, and I think, again, most of them worked pretty well, or gave scalps at least. And then we had some longs and some shorts. There were some that didn't work so well, and then some nice ones that actually at highs or intraday highs. And then really nice longs through here, maybe a too aggressive long through there, or that would have given just a decent little scalp off there. But then the second half here just hasn't been coming back to the long entries, and no matter how much I move them up, it just doesn't, you know. So at this point in time, I would have been looking for a test into this zone at this point in time. Yeah, it probably was, actually, I'm not sure, maybe it was looking for a test into the daily and then just bounce a little bit higher. Similar here, you know, there, it just hasn't come back to test the zone that I wanted, and now currently we're looking at this. So again, you're running the risk now that this is just suddenly going to go do a giant move through everything. So you need to start being a bit careful. But having said that, until we start seeing that, we're still in a giant uptrend on this. And so I copied this because the forex.com broker doesn't have all the history. So I just copied this in from the ICE chart so we can see where we're at on price. The price is currently, where is it? 185. So we're currently up here. I should probably copy and paste this in again. So just testing those zones up the top here. And could run up and take out these two highs at 188. So we'll need to see. But yeah, so I've been still alerting those zones from the ICE chart. So that's why you do see some short entries in there. You know, I had 2 day and 3 day supply here that I alerted. Then I think I alerted the 3 day again. And now we've got this 5 day as well. And then just to see if we can get retests. And that, again, hasn't been too bad. Has been reacting a bit off those levels. And then the retests have actually been giving nice scalps as well. This one, I think, is the only one that came really up high inside that 3 day zone. But again, it's given a nice scalp on the retest, but we still need to see that aggressive selling coming in, which we're just not seeing at the moment. Nothing aggressive. It's giving corrections and retracements, which are completely tradable when you're looking for scalps or intraday trading. Yeah, just not the big move that you would want to hopefully try and get in on the way down on that. And then pound yen. Pound yen actually I think is a little bit better looking at this. So again, I think it was similar. I think we had, you know, possibility of lower highs in here and taking out this and some shorts through there. So that was worth watching. And again, gave some decent shortable moves through here. And then a couple were a bit too early back in August, not surprising. And then some really nice longs off the lows down there. Then obviously a whole chunk through here where it probably didn't come back, similar to the euro yen. The other problem that we have is when you start to get all this chop, because then it is like, are you going to trade? Do you want to be trading? You know, we're alerting every single 12-hour demand. It's very hard to judge. You know, there's a 12-hour demand in there. In this case, I think I did alert the daily and the 5 day higher. But it's possible this comes down into there. Then if it misses that, then you're kind of like, oh, well, actually that 12 that hasn't been tested properly. But then there's also a weekly and now there's a monthly below. And it becomes very hard to judge when you have all the chop, like where it might bounce. So to some extent, I'm just kind of having to give the best guess I can. But in a lot of cases, then it won't come back down to where I want it to. So now we're up hitting 2 week, 3 week supply, so I'm more inclined to look for shorts on this, but like euro yen, it really isn't showing any sign of wanting to reject as yet. It's just a nice, neat consolidation, but certainly isn't a kind of a significant sell-off that we can see from previous moves. Let's move my alert by mistake. was so much nicer back in the day when you could, if you pulled the alert on the chart like this, then you would get a warning saying, do you want to move your alert? They got rid of that ages ago now, but it still really annoys me, particularly when I'm on mobile or on my iPad, because then sometimes I just drag them and don't notice, and then randomly I'll have like a 3-day demand alert go, and it's not anywhere near any 3-day demand. So yeah, you can keep an eye on this anyway, just for where we are now. Like we've hit 2 weekly supply there. If we get another wick up, just taking out this consolidation to 3 week. So we'll see what happens there. And also I can see there's a new 6 month demand down here now. But yeah, I need to look at those higher time frames on this. But yeah, pretty good on pound yen there, I think. I think we have 70 or 80% of those alerts working on that. And then on to Aussie yen, which I've already mentioned a couple of times previously. So this was, with this back here is the nice example of what happens, when you do get that, actually when you get the first aggressive. So let me show you the monthly. So that was a monthly demand. It's a nice, clean, neat one. It's had a swing fail of the lows here. So like I said, it took out the lows of the 6 month demand. Made a nice, neat monthly demand in there, closes above, comes back and tests it and just takes off. So it's nice when it makes a nice, neat move like that. And it was a double test as well, so I think it did. I was thinking maybe it had one down there as well, but no, I think I am thinking of up here. So it had the first test here, really strong move off there, then it came back for a retest, and then another really strong move. In these cases, didn't come back down to test any of the lower zones inside, and in fact did have some shop here that haven't been tested. So it's nice and clean and neat when it does that, but again, it's hard to judge which one is going to do that and which one's going to come back lower. But certainly, like I say, the clean view of that monthly demand with a nice close above, and not 2 candles, just a single candle, no messing around, tend to be the most reliable ones. And then the downside on this is it hasn't really come back, so I've got to manage to get another long entry in here. But even that was a lot of wicks and a lot of messing around. And then just hasn't really come back for any other long re-entries I wanted. Like back down here, wanted the weekly after that initial takeoff, but didn't get it. Again, some of the shorts haven't been too bad. This one, looking for, I think that one I was saying it was a high risk. That might be why it's black rather than swing failure in there. And it does get reactions off the zones, like sometimes gives a few pushes first. Now this October move again, I think that was the China news again. And I think this was one of the only ones actually that came down and filled that gap. The Aussie, I think the Euro yen and pound yen, I don't think have filled this gap that they made from back on 5th of October. Let me check. Okay, so that has just about, not entirely, there is a small, but filled a lot of the gap on pound yen. And Euro yen, yeah, didn't even get close. So big gap here, and I think maybe CAD yen was the other one. Maybe just didn't, just again push straight off the top, not caring about the giant gap left below. And at some point, it will come back and fill that gap. So back to Aussie yen. So yeah, my bias was pretty solid on this. Like I was biased in the right direction, but then it's only come back to give me one long entry on this. However, having said that, the short entries haven't been too bad. Like the final test ones are the ones that fail. So again, be conscious of that when you're watching my alerts or doing your own, that once you've had an ABC down, if you had a 3-way move down, then you can still alert for a lower high. But obviously if it's just coming into demand, so here we have an ABC, it's coming to demand and then it just goes straight back up through it. So while it might give you a lower high there, and it's worth looking because we've got a weekly in the bigger picture, it's this supply has given you no proof of being, these sellers have given you no proof of being stronger than these buyers down here. They might give you that proof, but so far they haven't. So it's worth, like, I alert them and it's worth watching them. But you can see here, obviously this is one of the strongest charts that has been. But when it has that retest there, didn't have a 3-way move down, but did come down into demand. When it has this retest here, even this one. Over here, similar things, once it's come down ABC into demand, did give you a little scalp, but then once it's come up through here, then it's still, the bigger picture is still the uptrend. So when you're looking for shorts, when you're going counter to a strong uptrend or vice versa, if it's strong downtrend, know that if you're assuming there'll be a lower high, it's still an assumption at that stage until you actually see it work. Doesn't mean you shouldn't look for it, because at some point this thing's going to come down and it's going to give a really decent move down. So if you're a high time frame trader, you can add little bits on these entries, the stop much higher, and then you're waiting for that big move down, which it will inevitably come. It's just a question of when. Except if it's gold, then it might come for extended periods of time. So yeah, that's, I think, all on the yen pairs. And I do need to come back to all of these on the high time frames now, because obviously they're the strongest generally, with the yen being the weakest currencies based on a chart perspective for a while. I need to see what closes these have done, whether they've created. So I can see obviously there, this has created 6-month demand on pound yen. This is, I think this already had a 3-month. I mean, they've come up so hard. Actually, they're probably either going to be miles away from their new demands, or I've already tested them or haven't made anything new because they've been coming up so quickly. So unless you get a retracement on a monthly candle, then you're not going to have a new monthly demand if the next candle closes green. Then CAD, I'll do CAD yen first because it's obviously similar to the other yen charts that I've just looked at. So yeah, there's that October pump again, like it did fill most of the gap, but not all of it. Never came back down. And CAD yen obviously here has been a prime example of something that just hasn't wanted to come back for any of my long entries. So again, looks like I'm very short biased, but I wasn't. I was just wanting it to come back for long entries that it never came back for. But again, the shorts haven't been too bad on this, assuming like, here I was obviously too aggressive, and now it's made a 6-month demand there, so it might have just tried to pick that up, that area early anyway. But actually, it does react quite well off previous zones and off swing failures and things like that. Back over here, similar to all the others, I was short biased while we were still at this kind of, are we going to make a lower high here point? And then we did manage to get some early longs in on this, some a little bit early and then the right time, a little bit early and then the right time. Doesn't always make it easy for you to get in. And then back in August, September, similar to, I think, dollar yen actually, yeah, would be the same as CAD yen with this sort of chop around, but generally giving some quite nice little scalp entries through there while it just went sideways for a while. So yeah, I would say if you're trading any of the yen pairs, you just be conscious of that. Be conscious firstly of now these large new zones that they've likely got. When they come back down, be conscious of these very badly drawn trendline stops that you've got through there, so that while it's very nice to think you're going to get something like this all the way down. So, I mean, in some cases, I'll leave all the alerts in there, but also, you've got other scenarios like this where when it does decide to come down, it's, this would have had demands all through here. And remember, I did have alerts going left, right, and center, and it just plowed through absolutely everything. And the yen does seem a little bit more inclined to do that if it wants to. So be careful trying to take longs once these do start retracing, because I think there's a fair chance they're going to go back and probably fill these gaps down here when they are ready. Okay, so that's CAD yen. And then moving on to the CAD pairs. So we've got dollar CAD, euro CAD, and pound CAD are the remainder on this layout. You can see here, this has made a massive new monthly supply in there, which it's just testing now. So it's going to be interesting to see what reaction we've got here. Having said that, again, wanted to be biased long on this. I think, yeah, this was the challenge. Oh yeah, I'll tell you about this structure because these are the ones I absolutely hate. I think this had made monthly demand. Yeah. So this had made, like I said, it was a decent monthly demand, but then ultimately once it doesn't test it, then it becomes a not very nice one. So it did have a monthly demand in there. I need to look at the bigger picture structure because I think I was surprised that this didn't hold a test, or for barely any test off this, and then it's come straight back through it. I mean, it's taken a few candles to test it, but then normally I like that. Normally that's not too bad. And you can see over here, there's a similar scenario where it's had a few tests when I move up, whereas in this case, maybe it's just end of year profit taking, the fact the dollar came down and just my bias is just not quite right in that instance. But yeah, so it did have a monthly demand on there, which it's now flipped to a like a fairly dubious monthly supply. I think that was the thing. I think it hadn't hit, firstly, it hadn't come all the way up to the top, very similar to the dollar. You know, like I said, the dollar, right at the beginning, the dollar didn't test the zone that I wanted to at the high. And I think that's kind of what I wanted on this. I was waiting for this to hit up here to get the short. And then it made this monthly demand. So then I was like, okay, well, now we look for longs on the monthly demand when it comes back through. And in this case, it's just run, did get a bounce off the second one, but it's just ultimately run straight back through the entire monthly demand in there, taking the stops below. And again, like lower time frame, it doesn't look so bad. It did give a bit of a bounce here, did give a bit of a bounce here, but not what you really want, which is a bounce up to there before then potentially retracing more deeply, given it's a monthly. The other thing it did, and like I said, I'll talk about this structure because this is one I hate. So these broadening wedge type structures I really hate. And here, and it's similar to what we saw on dollar Swiss franc as well. This was, and it made probably the same point in time that this made, I think, a 2-week. Yeah. So again, it made a 2-week demand, did bounce off it, then made a weekly demand sitting on top of it, but then came straight back through the weekly. Now that does happen when you get a reversal, but I think at this point in time, I was kind of going, okay, we're going to get a bounce in here on this weekly demand, get a move up into that proper supply up there, and then drop, not just come straight back through on the next candle. And that's where also that, and similarly here, you can see on the 2-day chart, there's a 2-day demand in there, and it's just that, just plowed straight back through it without even taking out the high. So it's pretty unusual. And these broadening wedge kind of structures, lower time frame, you know, because you can see I was long biased through here, but then it took out the lows before the run. So again, really annoying. And then when it comes back to retest, it just runs straight back through it. I don't mind broadening wedges when they're, when they're kind of in direction of trend. So for example, if you have like, this might actually be, I can't really tell low time frame, but if you have a broadening wedge like this, when, you know, you're already in a downtrend, that's fine. Then I can read those, no problem. But when they do them like this, at the point of a reversal, it's a little frustrating because you're kind of like, yeah, here you got a big decent move up, you're long biased, but then it takes out the long stops at the lows. To be fair, maybe I should have been waiting down here and not trying to long early in this area. Then bounces straight back up, and then you're kind of like, okay, now you're back to bullish again. I mean, this is just what the market does. Makes a new demand and then just goes screw you and goes straight back through it. It's a very classic end top, really, but it's just that broadening wedge in the middle that I just get becomes annoying because then you're just biased, just messes with your head. But yeah, so anyway, on the whole, I was very bullish on this again because of dollar hitting that annual demand. So we had some really nice longs back down here. A little bit, yeah, I think this dollar CAD can just be a bit annoying. I think at this point in time, you know, September, I would have wanted to look for a breakout. Again, didn't really hit major supply up here at these highs, so I was looking for that another move up, but no, it came back down. I think this was at the point that we got that extra bottom on the dollar when the dollar came back and took out the lows, I believe. And then, yeah, again, still long biased up here because wanting to get a move up into this supply up here and then just didn't quite make it, unfortunately. So, and again, hasn't given the retest. So even after this, like once it came to there, I was like, okay, now we've got supply here, we've got supply here, let's put some short alerts in, and then just hasn't come back to test any of them. And similarly, you know, while it's still holding this monthly demand in here, like at this point in time, I wouldn't have wanted to be trying to short there or here even, because at this point, then it can also run back through. But yeah, so dollar CAD a little bit more frustrating. There's some good stuff in there, but also some really not good stuff and some difficult things for me to read on the structure anyway. If you're able to read those structures better than me, then please let me know. Answers on a postcard of how you can recognize those more easily. EURCAD. I think this is more, again, similar to the Euro Aussie and Euro Aussie and Euro New Zealand cross pairs. Again, it's kind of up in this massive 2-monthly supply by the looks of it up there that I've deleted so I can see what I'm doing. So I think my bias has been more on the short side, or at least on the short side until we get back down into this monthly demand or weekly demand. So looking for a long here is fine. Now looking for this long on this monthly below. And again, some quite nice sideways movements. So we can see this group has some really nice longs in here. Even for scalps, actually, it looks like pretty much all the longs have given decent moves here, and even one very nice one down at the bottom there. And then, in fact, the shorts don't look too bad either, so not a great one there. I'm not sure what that was. It's like it's in a weird place. So at the beginning, while still in the up move, shorts not so good, but then once we've taken out the high, then these retest shorts pretty good coming back down here. And again, depending on the time frame of trading, you know, if you trade these, this is essentially giving you 5 or 6 entries on a weekly supply. So if you want to hold that for that bigger move down, then that's what you can do. But like I say, for me, it's just scalps off those levels. So not bad on EUROCAD front. And I think pound CAD again was not too bad until more recently again. So the challenge on this again was the structure. So monthly supply, you can see in the big brown level above, 3 monthly demand, or maybe it was monthly or something lower earlier at the lows there, and then made a new monthly demand in the middle. So not a strong monthly demand, but you can see this large box. But obviously it's come down deeper inside it. So tried to get some bounces off the top up here, but then it's come back down deeper. So my bias has still been long. I think I was generally long biased on this, but then I think I checked myself more recently because it spent so long in here. Again, it's trying to remember that. So if it probably created that monthly demand September or October, and now we're 3 months later, it's trying to remember, are you short biased, are you long biased, you know, and having to look at the bigger picture again. If this is a big monthly supply here, maybe I shouldn't be, maybe ultimately it's going to take out this zone and I shouldn't be being long biased when we're in a general monthly supply, looking at an 8-hour or 12-hour chart. So got to be very careful of your bias on that front. And you've got to be careful when moving all the zones around with your mouse because they're not locked. So yeah, again, bias has been okay. We've had lots of longs through here. Some of the more aggressive ones less good up there. And then longs based on this weekly demand down here. And then again, like December's just got a bit funnier. I think here, obviously, we had a 12-hour demand. I think there might have been a 5-day or something in here as well. And it's just gone straight back through there to get right back down to the bottom of the bounce. But also now has come back on off daily supply. Now it's got a weekly supply. So again, just a bit messy around here. So I think I'll probably not alert this too much in the near term. I might say about leaving that one. These couple of alerts I've already got on this, but bias is a little bit mixed on this unless I can find something new if I look at the high time frame again. And then on the short side, probably about 50 on this. You can see there's a few in here that only had tiny moves off, and then again, once we came onto the other side of the V, some decent drops there, and some nice, like if you manage to get the swing fails at the highs, and some of the start of the impulse. So again, just to reiterate to you, like this, the ones at the start of the impulse are the higher probability ones. So you know, if we've had a down move like this, even if it's hit a monthly demand or something at the low, when it comes back to test the start of that move, that's when you're going to get a decent move off. But whereas this might give you a move, and maybe you get FOMO, and maybe it's going to give you a move down there, but it's much less reliable. And you can see the same even through here. Again, this obviously has now made a higher low, so these are generally less reliable anyway. And then once you've had your blow off top and your drop back down, then these are the better ones to be trading to the short side. And then in contrast on the long side, so similar here, this hasn't come back down to the start of the impulse, but obviously overall the price action remains more bullish. So the more aggressive longs are still working better through here, but ultimately it did come back down to the start of the impulse, start of that last up move. So it just depends how aggressively you want to trade, how much time you have for trading. Do you want to trade every little scalp on these charts, or do you want to just wait, go, okay, I'm going to wait till it's back down here, forget all these interim zones that are being created, and just wait till it gets to the start of the impulse, or the top of an impulse and the bottom of an impulse. Yeah, okay, so that's all the CAD pairs. So that's generally FX, I've covered all the FX now. We've got metals and indices remaining. So I guess, like I said, all up, I think that's pretty much what I said at the beginning. So August was a little bit harder. The trending ones are a little bit harder. December's a little bit harder. And then there's been a few sort of messing around scenarios on the 3-weekly and the 2-weekly on the dollar CAD and dollar Swiss franc pairs. And then, yeah, just some of the more, the difficulty being some of the more aggressive entries just having given much smaller scalps. So, like, probably the other big challenge is, how much of a move you're going to get off each of the zones. So, even if you want to trade here, if you're coming off daily supply or something, you just need to assess, where's your nearest demand. So if you're going, okay, we're trading mid-range here, not waiting for the top or bottom for the potential bigger move, where's your next demand? So here, even if you took this entry, you probably want to take profit there. You can risk holding it to here if you can move your stop to break even. But again, then here, similar, very, very minor, drop there, very minor drop here, very minor on those two. You can hope that they're going to give you more, but they don't give you more. So maybe those are the ones to avoid. Yeah, I think if you're trading these alerts, I think overall you just want to stick to the start and the ends of the impulses and to major levels. So it's things like this, for example. That's not a good example, but what you're looking for is, okay, we're trading a daily supply, so you've got a tighter stop when it comes in here, but really you want this daily supply to be in a bigger. So if you've got a daily supply at a weekly level, then you can be more inclined to trade mid-range and not wait for it to come all the way back up here. So maybe I can try and think about that a little bit more this year. Just trying to think of lessons learned and how I can improve the alerts for myself and for you guys. But I still think for the most part you should make money, assuming you don't do crazy stuff. So let's move on to the metals. So gold, obviously, just crazy. And I really laid off, I think like earlier on, I was just like still in denial about gold for the first part of the year. But I think once it just kept going after the first half of the year, I really laid off putting any types of alerts on it, really. And again, it just, like I've always had longs on this, but it just doesn't come back and test them. Like this whole move from August to October, barely even came back to test on 12-hour time frame. So I think for a long time I was dragging alerts up, and I've deleted them all now because I was just like, if this does come down, you either need to watch it, but there's no point me alerting, the daily here, the daily here, the daily here, the daily here, all these zones that haven't been tested all the way out. However, I did lay off on the short side dramatically. So once we got out of this consolidation, possibility to still get a lower high here, possibility to get a swing fail here. But once we went up from there, it was like, well, we're probably just going to keep going now. Here, gave a little scalp for a lower high on that. I think it was a 4-hour supply or something in there, worth watching. But yeah, didn't get very far at all. And then just kept running and hasn't come back for any long entries. So we've got one long entry back in November. But yeah, you really need to be trading this very actively and much lower time frame, or just be a lot better at it than me. Like, once something goes to all-time high, I'm just not really that interested. It's similar with crypto that I just prefer ranges. Like if you're trying to trade decent risk to reward, you either need to be watching all the time. So for example, I can alert here on the daily, but if it comes back down, you then need to be monitoring it and waiting for the turnaround. So that's what I'll do if and when they get to zones that are alerted. But if they do, in this case, they just don't come back to test any of these zones, and what do you do? So I much prefer when things start to go sideways, because that's when you can actually get trades with proper defined stops, and you're not basically guessing. And then we'll see. So here, and rejection of daily supply there, and then looking for a swing fail into the daily again here. Again, just gave a little bounce and then consolidation. Again, possible swing fail of the all-time high there, but no, it's run back up through. And now thinking, maybe that was just that blow off top for the end of the year. And obviously we've got some drama going on in the world with silver. I'm not fully across it, so you'll have to go and research that yourself. But silver has it's got a big discrepancy, I think, between the China price and the London prices. But yeah, I don't understand enough about it, so I won't comment further on that. But that's kind of part of the reason that we had this blow off top at the start of this week, on which I'll get onto silver, which mimicked a little bit on gold, and then the drop thereafter. A lot of people think big people are trapped in bad trades and unable to deliver silver orders and things like that. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of here. You know, we've now got weekly demands below, so we could just end up with a giant consolidation through here, similar to, it's more likely, I think, you know, we're going to get something like this through here, or we end up with a head and shoulders perhaps, and then we do get the bigger drop. But no reason to think that right now. We just need to see how the price does and how it reacts on these levels. Like if it starts breaking below here, but barring a wick into that daily, I mean, that's definitely the only reason to potentially have another alert in there, so I might add one. But barring a wick below into that daily, if it breaks below this level, then we can start getting bearish. But or if it starts making any significant supply, starts losing my voice a bit. This time of year, did I comment at the start of the video? I'm in my like woolly fleece jumper and hat, and I'm sitting inside, and it's freezing. I'm under a heated blanket as well. Portugal for you, it's just insanely cold. Except we're insanely cold indoors. It's fine outside. Well, it's not fine, it's still cold, but okay, and then silver obviously has followed gold finally and taking off dramatically, so it wasn't doing as well previously, and then has now caught up, and again, similar to gold, not giving any re-entries through this last run up here. Did give some nice entries earlier on, and again, I was a bit too, while it still had supply, I was still, so this, I think, it's not going to load. Yeah, so all-time high previously was 50. So while we were still in this top coming up to taking out all-time high, it was still worth looking for a few shorts through here. And then, yeah, so some of them, I think earlier on, again, gave reasonable scalps. So a couple of longs, a few longs through here, which is nice. Short there, that one that worked here, one that didn't work here, and the one that worked there. So that wasn't too bad, and then it just took off. And then similar scenario to gold, managed to get one long re-entry here, but then it's just blasted through any other short possibilities. And then this being, are we going to do a swing fail at all-time high? And the other one I looked at on the short side, just because, so if you go and look at the gold chart, we did have a scenario on gold when it had its break of all-time high. It went up to, this was, I think, yeah, it was this green line. So it actually, yeah, it was here, it was where I was looking previously. So I did have an alert in there just to monitor it, because firstly, it was the 161 fib of this last down move. And then secondly, it was also the 113 fib of the last wave below. I won't go into detail on that now, but when, if you look at the gold chart, gold went to the same level, that 113 level, and then did a much bigger correction. So I was wondering if we get the same on silver. So I had alerted for just to watch here, but then it was ran higher anyway. I think this upper green line was the 127 fib, so it's just kind of, but again, now it's just watching to see what it'll do. No reason it should have particularly done the same as what gold did there, but it was just looking at how gold responded when it broke all-time high. I was just wondering if we'd get any sort of response of silver when it broke all-time high. And I think, sorry, when I say gold breaking all-time high, I don't mean this year, I mean the previous, when it broke the all-time high over the equivalent time to this, i.e. back in, where are we? Doesn't want to load for me, lower time frames at the moment. Back in 2011, I think when it broke that. So gold then, I think, broke it later, or broke it in 2020 or 2022 or something, and then consolidated for a while before the bigger breakout. Whereas this broke it, did consolidate a bit, but nowhere near. It's not really resembling gold at all. But anyway, so now this has now made a daily supply. We did have that potential blow off top there, so it's going to be interesting to see what pans out on this now. But really, yes, it was blow off top, but we haven't had any follow-ups, so it's kind of interesting. But again, I've only got alerts all the way down here now. It's just hard to know if it starts retracing, like how much it's going to retrace, so you just need to be watching this. But it's been pretty hard to trade. And then also, I think the group were asking me a little bit about XPT and XPD, so platinum, palladium. So we've just charted those as well, and they were sort of similar. So platinum has potentially swing failed all-time high, closed the year as a swing failed all-time high, so that's interesting. So I alerted down here at the yearly level fund, doesn't mean it's going to go all the way back down there. So it'll be interesting again to see what kind of follow-up these get. Well, is that just going to be like, okay, we've taken all-time high and now we're going to correct significantly? So that was on XPT, and then XPD Palladium is still slightly more, I can't say bearish, it's bullish on this time frame, it's bullish on the larger chart as well, but bearish from the perspective that it has just hit 6 months supply. So just be cautious of that if you're trading that. But yeah, on the whole, so with silver and gold, like I just really haven't had a great deal of alerts on them more recently, because once they take off, I'm just not particularly interested. You know, if you can be watching these and watch the reactions on all the levels, that's up to you. But if it's not coming back down to levels I'm interested, then I'm not interested in trading it. It's just the way I trade doesn't work for me to get in aggressive trends, because if I tend to do that, I tend to be the one that's buying the top. I think I'm just burned from crypto. I think like as soon as there's an aggressive trend and I watch it, and then I get FOMO and then I jump in with everybody else. This was one of my early learnings, I think, from the crypto market, was just don't do that. So I think, you know, even if it's silver or gold, which are obviously way more reliable than crypto and not likely to go to zero in a day like crypto does, yeah, I've just kind of learnt my lesson in the crypto market. So if anything's very aggressively going in a trend direction, I tend not to try and jump into it. I wait at least for daily tests and things like that to be able to get in later. And that, yeah, is probably a nice segue into the indices as well. So this has basically been the same scenario. So if you followed me earlier this year, you'll know again, like I was being not aggressive on the short side, because if there are levels there, there's no reason not to alert them. It's just whether you trade them or not. But again, I laid off, particularly on S&P and NASDAQ, when they started going, I kind of laid off putting anything too aggressive on the short side. The alternative other countries' indices, so FTSE, Euro 50, J225, the other ones that are in Aussie, I tend to find generally easier. I think the US indices I tend to track more because of crypto, because they do, like, because crypto to some extent will follow what S&P and NASDAQ are doing, although today is an exception. Yeah, I'm like, and I have traded them in the past, but I'm less inclined to trade them now because I just think they can be a bit too crazy. And again, it's probably something a bit like Euro Pound, that if you trade extensively, you can learn what they do. And particularly learn how the intraday stuff happens. So the intraday stock hunts, like what, you know, the structures where Asia does something and then London reverses it or continues it, or and then what New York does. I think there's probably a lot of patterns intraday that you can learn, but I haven't had the time or inclination to learn them myself. So yeah, we've been going, what, an hour and a half now, so hopefully I'm almost done. Just got to go through these indices and then we can finish, and then I can start actually hiding all these crosses on my chart so I can actually see what I'm doing. So finally got US 30 here. And again, like, I did manage to get a lot more longs in on this. But again, yeah, the challenge with these, and this is, I guess, also what makes me nervous with gold and silver, is that historically, when, you know, in these earlier times, like, longs just really didn't hit. So at the start of this year, we had this big drop. Then we've had this retracement, and, you know, we had this whole period here where it was just wasn't giving away long entries again. I think it wasn't coming back. I don't think we had a great deal, maybe a few. And then once they start to move, the Dow's generally not been bad, but the problem you have, and particularly on the S&P and NASDAQ, is, you know, once it does start hitting your long entries, that's at the point it's reversed. And NASDAQ, the Dow's a little bit easier, so we do have some longs through here that were all right, but then, you know, at this point, little bounce off that weekly, and then suddenly it drops down the side, and then similarly here, you know, it's kind of blow off top. Didn't give me the lower high, blow off top, and then just suddenly you just blast through all your long entries. You know, and in this case, hasn't been so bad. You know, we did get really long there on this weekly demand, a little bit harder to get into if it gave a scalp, even if you took the early entry on that. Gave a long in there. Here, this one I think is a little bit early, but might have held the zone anyway. And did, you know, these, so if you can get the continuation longs, it can be quite good. So the Dow actually hasn't been too bad, barring, say, one or two instances where it's just decided to do a bigger drop. Not too bad on the long side. Shorts also not too bad, but harder. And then it's just a question of how much they give you. So, you know, a decent move down there, but much smaller moves down here. And one that didn't work, I think, there. And similar here, like decent drop off there, then the retest drop really didn't give much at all. Then this is just a sort of a fuckery move, really. Then a nice retest entry there, but again, didn't get much lower. And then finally here, again, a decent move, but is it going to, well, we're just going to keep going up now. All of the indices, I will say, just of this week's PA, all of them do have weekly and 3-weekly demand. I need to go through and check where the monthlies are and all that sort of stuff still as well. So, you know, in this case, we can see we've come quite deep into this weekly now. And now it's finally giving a decent bounce up. But in the case of S&P and NASDAQ, they've, I think maybe at NASDAQ, maybe not have hit. And S&P, I think, still right at the top of it. So again, like while we're having like a sort of bit of a correction on these, I'm not bearish on them right now. So moving on to S&P, probably not going to be dissimilar to Dow, really. Again, some of the earlier shorts less likely to work, but to give them the tiny little scalps, but generally not as good. At least in some of these cases as well, I'm disclaiming them a lot more than I used to, just sort of saying it's counter trend and just to watch it. But again, some nice longs throughout here. Did manage to get, so I've been better on the long side, I think, in this half. I think been trying to be a little bit more aggressive on the long side. Well, I haven't been doing that on gold and silver. But also I'd say I'm being more aggressive on the long side, but then also this is now, you can see now we've moved into a bigger type rangey movement, unlike this where it just takes off and just keeps running for ages. So again, yeah, short side significantly less reliable, but still worth watching for swing failures. And then I started to look more for shorts once we'd had this big move down, but obviously it came back and took out the all-time high eventually anyway. And then here, I think it's just front run this 12-hour demand there. But yeah, all up not too bad on this when I look at the chart. Some things worked, some things didn't. NASDAQ, I think, is going to be pretty much the same. Yeah, so again, some more aggressive shorts here that may or may not have given scalps and mix of them back there, and then some nice long entries from July, what's that, August, September. A little bit more of a difficulty through here, I think. Just trying to figure out the biases, but you've got that giant candle down. That was the tariffs again, I think. Month of October. I think maybe we had that little pump on the 5th of October from the tariffs, but then the indices, I think, then corrected it pretty fast. And some nice little scalps in there on the short side. And then again, once it starts moving into these bigger ranges, you can see I'm just generally, my alerts become better and it's just much easier to trade. And I think in this case, actually, we're probably still in a large weekly supply here as well. So I think that might have been an entry for the start of weekly supply, but I've just, if it flips it to a demand, then I'll tend to just delete. I'll keep the most recent one if there's one sitting on top of the other, but I need to go back. I flip back and forth just to remember, you know, is this all still operating in a weekly supply that hasn't been broken yet? And then you can see on NASDAQ here, it's made this new 3-week demand, pretty big, but I haven't alerted it. So again, I haven't updated my alerts for the last week or so, particularly I've left what I already had. While I waited to look at the monthly zones and things like that. And then let's just do Russell because that's the other US one. Russell also is generally quite a lot nicer to trade. So generally, I would actually personally, I would say avoid S&P and NASDAQ and trade any of the others, like even down Russell. And then, yeah, the EUROAUD indices, because I just think they're much more reliable. But Russell on the whole, actually, in fact, there's a lot of shorts through here, but these shorts are actually generally pretty nice. I'm not sure why I was so aggressively shorting. Is there something over there to the left that I'm... No, we're at an all-time high, but I'm not sure why. I think it was just giving me, zones, and because Russell is more likely to reject zones. So I think we came up, we took out all-time high, then it was worth looking for shorts to look for a lower high in there. So there's probably a couple in there that didn't work. But some nice chop through here. So it did give scalps and daily and intraday I did little mini scalps and swings all through that section. So you can see the chop you get on Russell is much nicer than the chop you get on S&P. So yeah, again, you know, like lots of shorts through here. Like I probably was more aggressively shorting than I should have been, but I guess if it gives me zones, it gives me zones. And you can see actually quite a lot of them worked. A couple that in there that are a little bit too aggressive. And then some nice longs as well. Also, so while I say I'm aggressively shorting, but also clearly I was on the long side as well. So got some really nice little scalps off this over this period. And then similar here. Again, some nice shorts, aggressive and less aggressive, and some nice longs as well. So all that pretty good on Russell. And then J225, ready to go. Getting there. So yeah, I was very biased long on this from back here. Like I was skeptical and saying it was going to be hard to know when we could get in or not, but I think it made 6 months demand. Maybe I thought it made a 6 month, but I've only got a 3 month marked in there. So I'm thinking, no, I can't be thinking lower. But yeah, so I was looking for, I think I had a longs in July. I think it was around this level, this 3 month. I know there was a 6 month in there as well. I think it was a very, very long bias in here, and then it just really took off from there. And then some of the shorts are just trying and seeing what happens. But some, I guess, with hindsight, I can probably say I probably should have left them alone. Just due to once you get a 6 month or a 3 month on the indices, things really do seem to like to run. So yeah, some of the shorts less good on here, and some of the longs still pretty good. But even some of the shorts giving little scalps as well. And now again, we've gone back into this sort of more of a sideways range for the last 2 months. We've been giving entries, decent long and short entries, both directions. And now it just remains to be seen here. It looks like we made a 2 weekly demand, which it's holding there. It's got some stops below, so we just need to see, are we at a point with any of these they're going to reverse, or are we just had like a 2 month of sideways while it's got to the end of the year and people are profit taking, repositioning, and all that sort of stuff. I'm going to probably say the consistently across all the indices. Again, they're going to be like silver and gold, and when they do come down, they're probably going to come down pretty hard, and it's going to be quite hard to judge like where to buy. So you can see similar, you know, these are the tariff things that happen. Are we going to go into recession? God only knows. And if we do go into a recession, then hopefully we'll get some neater price action rather than these very aggressive moves down, which then bounce really, really hard. Not really sure what's going to happen. You know, was this recession? Just sideways 21, 22. No, I guess that was just coming out of COVID. Probably what it should have done, but what the US indices just kept going up because of the stimulus. But yeah, the difficulty with these is going to be similar, that we've got, like in this case, I think it's actually tested a few of the zones, but I can see there's still weeklies and 5 days and things in there that haven't been tested, and then, you know, all the way down to the bottom. So are we going to again just suddenly have a few weeks of hellish move down, just taking out all of this before we then continue? So just be a little bit careful of that across all the indices, I think. And then the last three, Euro, Aussie, and FTSE. I think this is pretty much the same. Just some nice shorts. No, say these aren't really that nice. Shorting a little bit too aggressively there. I think I was hoping for that lower high and then a bigger drop, which did happen, but I think it took out these highs first over here. I'm not sure what I was thinking there. I don't know if there was a monthly supply, but that seemed to be a pretty bad call. And then yeah, again more recently, so yeah, back to August being slightly less good. I think that's the thing probably across all the indices, because August was such was just generally a more trending month, and we just had the big drop on the indices, and then it just went straight back through everything. So I think that's why August, I had the sense that August wasn't as good. And then as we come into September, October, November, a lot of the FX pairs and indices became a lot more sideways, so we were able to get a lot more trades in both directions. And I can see this probably Euro, actually I thought it was better than it was And I can see there's still some pretty good stuff in here, but then sort of you'll see something like this. But maybe it was just that 7th of November move, because I remember that from the Dow as well, just kind of, the blow off top and then just running back through everything. I can't remember what the news was then. Or was that the government shutdown? Were we just running while the government was shut down, and then as soon as it opened again, it dumped? I kind of have a sense that might have happened. And then some more shorts through more recently. And I think, again, I think I was wanting to look for longs here, but just some of the chop and the retesting was a little uncertain of, and now obviously broken all-time high again. So a bit mixed on Euro, maybe more 50-50 than I thought. I thought I was a bit better on that front. And then Aussie. So Aussie was one of the ones that actually became more bearish. This was the only one. I think all the others have remained pretty bullish. This one I became more bearish once we were sort of messing around in here a bit, unable to make a significant break of all-time high. I think this was a long, but I think I said be careful of this long, because if this is a swing failed all-time high, it's going to fail. And then again, once you use alerts, like if they don't work on the way down, I'm just kind of like, okay, worth trying, because this is still an uptrend up to this point. If it's got a weekly demand or whatever these were through here, then it's still worth looking for longs. In this case, it's come all the way back down to the start, or not to the start. I wanted, I think, it to come back down to this 3-month demand. I think around this point in time as well, I was wanting a lot of them to fill these gaps. And I think, NASDAQ and S&P did on that big drop. So we were quite prepared for looking for those gap fills, but this one didn't come quite low enough, although there's some chop through here. So arguably you could say things are filled by wicks at least. And now Aussie's just an interesting one, see what's going to happen. So it's hit weekly or 3-weekly supply in there. It's now made a monthly, or it has a monthly just above. So it'll be quite interesting. So far, generally what happens with the indices, because they're generally strong, is that they might give us reactions. So similar to this, then you get a reaction off this weekly zone, but ultimately it's going to drop back into demand and then just drop back and then eventually push through. So that's typically what we see, even if we have weekly supplies and things on the indices. But this is the first time in a while that I've seen a 3-weekly supply or a monthly supply on one of them. So it'll be kind of interesting to see if this actually does give rise to a bigger move down. And I saw something earlier as well about potentially the tariff dramas are going to get resolved, or whatever that means, in January. So that could be a nice indicator for this. So I guess if the tariffs, if we have a bad tariff outcome for China, then this, you could see that big drop come in on the AU 200 here. So other than that, did I even look at the alerts particularly? I think I didn't go too heavy on this because I was a bit unsure here, and I think it just got really choppy once it had broken all-time high. So we've got some decent longs in there until it then failed, dropping down, and then was just looking for some shorts once it had started looking like it might make a lower high, although it did eventually take out the high again. So just a bit less on AIM for this half. And finally, last but not least, we have FTSE, which is another one that's just suddenly got super strong and had some really nice entries in this as well. So again, similar to the others, it's finally, this again is inclined to come back to give you entries, which is at least nice. Shorts are hit and miss, as always. Some of these early ones over here didn't work, then a couple would have given you nice scalps a bit later. Similar here, and then a lot of long entries, obviously some only giving scalps when it pulled back a bit more deeply, or was at least holding larger zones potentially. One not so good there, and then into the short entry, and then picking up a lower demand. And similar here, even this move in November, took out most of them, had a short entry and then a long entry and took out most of them, and then just went back down to the start of the impulse. But again, just not too bad through here with some of these entries. And now we just need to see if this is going to take off again, like EU50. So I'm starting to lose my voice. I've been going almost 2 hours now. So 6 months of alerts. Finally, I can remove them from my charts and start thinking about my bias. So if you're interested, and if anybody makes it to the end of this video, then feel free to ask me any questions in the Telegram channel, or if anything you specific want to see charted, or talked about. What I might try and do, if I see some significant zones and there have been significant changes in structure, I might try and do like more of an analysis video on the high time frames just to see what we think going forward, perhaps at this weekend. But for in the interim, I need to do more of an update on crypto and the annual closes there, because there's some fairly critical annual closes, 1 month, 3 months, 6 month, and annual closes on crypto that's not looking overly promising for a lot of the alt market, I have to say. So I want to have a look at that first, and then maybe at the weekend I can try and do an analysis video on this or a stream. Anyway, I hope that's useful. Feel free to hit me up in Telegram if you have any questions. If you're using the alerts, I hope they're going well for you. If you want any advice on how to use alerts and how to actually get in on the entries, what kind of strategies and things like. I've also got educational videos on YouTube, so feel free to have a look at those. I think it's on crypto, but the same things would apply to this, of the things you can look for, patterns, trend lines, low time frames, EMAs. There's a million different strategies you can use. All you're looking at with these alerts is going, okay, something's hitting a major zone in one direction or the other. You're going, am I trading with trend? If I'm trading with trend, then I'm looking for the next higher high or the next lower low. If you're counter trend, maybe you're just looking for more of a scalp. But all of them, you're really looking at the low time frame zones inside the high time frame zones for signs that the price is going to go in your direction, and then that's working out your own strategy for that. All I'm trying to do here is going, okay, here's a major zone, it's hit, you're looking for the reaction. If you don't get one, if it doesn't give you an entry, then you don't get one. And it's up to you to kind of work out how best you can do that, what timeframes you should use, and what's going to work like with your frequency of trading, whether you have a full-time job or whether this is your full-time job, all those sorts of things. But I've got a full educational video on YouTube of that, so feel free to go and watch that and ask me any questions if you need to. So I hope you've had a good New Year. Happy New Year to everybody. Please like and subscribe and follow, because that supports me and then I can help more people. And hope 2026 goes well for you. Good night.